Engine Performance Expo viewers. We're here with George Bryce, and I'm super excited about this. We're here in your man cave and see a bunch of Wallies and motorcycles and cool stuff. So, hey, Engine Performance Expo, not just about V8s. We talk about single cylinders and V-twins and air-cooled, water-cooled. I guess you kind of been through all that, haven't you?
Yeah, thankfully I've had a great opportunity to work on single cylinder engines, air-cooled, and also all the way up to 900 cubic inch V8s. And we believe that the littlest pistons and the littlest valves in the world we've had a chance to develop and learn how to make a lot of power, all the way to the biggest pistons and the biggest valves and everything in between over a long career.
That's cool. So you started off racing motorcycles, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you got into, how'd you get into Pro Stock?
Well, that was kind of the mountain you climb. Even today, if you race a motorcycle or you have a motorcycle, you watch NHRA Pro Stock motorcycle, or you wish you were there, or there's other classes, top fuel bikes and pro street bikes, and the guys that are in that genre, they believe it's more popular than NHRA Pro Stock motorcycle. But in reality, they won't say it, but they really would love to be there. That's where you want to be if you're a motorcycle racer. If you've been on a motorcycle and you've staged at the drag strip and you've taken the lights and gone down the track, you visualize somewhere during that time, man, how cool it would be to be in NHRA. So I felt that way all the way from beginning, worked my way up, started NHRA Pro Stock motorcycle racing in about 1986, did it kind of part-time, and then I met the late great John Myers in '89, and he and I won a lot of races. And that was during that time when Dave Schultz, God rest his soul, and John Myers, rest his soul too, they're both gone now, but they raced so hard that over about an 8-year period they won 60 Wallies between each other.
Wow.
So that was a dominant time in our career where John won 33 of them and Dave won a bunch of them too. So that was a great time to learn.
Awesome. So back then, those were Suzuki's. So
Four-cylinder, 12,000 RPM.
Okay. Air-cooled engine.
Air-cooled with cylinder with fins on the heads and the cylinders. And of course, what a great tool to learn about engines, because we learned the whole thing about lubrication, airflow, all the equipment, all the tools, all the way for us to use flow benches and dynos and all the cool stuff over the years, and end up doing our own work, our own boring and honing, our own machining and balancing and learning about rings. And I mean, it ended up being just like a unbelievable laboratory to learn at a really fast speed.
Well, that's where it is, right? Those high-end levels of racing is, like I said, it's a lab.
Yeah.
Because every week you get to go back to the track and learn a little bit and make those iterations and changes, and you get to see exactly what it did. Now,
it's a dream for a guy like you or me that we want instant results. We want to know what happened now. We don't want to wait till we send it to a lab. It has to be processed and then they send it back. We want to know now. That's why dynos are cool. Right. That's why drag racing is cool. You get results in just a few seconds.
Yeah, you know what you got real quick. So back in those days with the Suzuki's, aluminum cylinders, aluminum blocks with iron liners.
Yeah, Los Angeles Sleeve Company, Lasco, was making our cylinders for us back then. And Wiseco was making the pistons. And I remember the first day, it was in 1984, Wiseco called me up and said, "Hey, you're breaking ringlands." I said, "Yeah." And they said, we got something for you that will stop you from breaking ringlands. And if you do what you're doing now, you'll probably win every race for the rest of the year. And they sent me a set of pistons to fit into my motorcycle, and they were called California Alloy. That's what it's called. And come to find out, years later, it was 2618. They went from 4032 to 2618, and we were the crash test dummy to make sure it would hold up.
And how did that work out for you?
Oh man, we needed it bad. We didn't know. We were shocking the system so bad that the 4032s were tough. They were really tough, but they were fragile and they could crack.
Too much silicon, right?
Yeah. So we would break the ringlands right off, and then of course you don't know about blow by till you break a ringland.
Oh, you'll know it when it happens.
Yeah.
Okay, so anyway, so from that iteration, where did the V-twin come in?
Well, having the shop, the boring and the honing, the balancing, the SERDI machine, the big dynos, all that stuff ended up giving us an opportunity to, on a local level, to help the circle track guys and the drag racing guys. And our shop expanded and grew. And at one time, we were doing almost 50% V8s, complete machine shop.
Okay.
We had, there was a guy had dirt late model. He was sponsored by a TV show called The Outdoor Trail.
Okay.
And we got him all the pieces from Dart to build a Buick to go in his late model dirt car. And it was a Rodeck block with the Dart heads,
Sure.
Buick heads, and of course he outran everybody by 1,000 RPM. And it was a cool time to kind of blend drag racing into the dirt. That happened with us a long time ago.
That's kind of cool. I didn't even know about that part of your career history.
So we've had a lot of dirt, a lot of circle track. I grew up in Florence, Darlington area, and I saw on TV the other day they did a tribute. Denny Hamlin's team did a tribute on Slick Johnson with his car. And Slick Johnson was the guy that ran the machine shop at Honest Charlie Speed Shop. And he taught me how to do boring and honing. He taught me how to do 3-angle valve jobs and how to do balancing. So,
get out of here.
Yeah, so
that's cool.
That was a great time. I saw it on TV just 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I got chill bumps big enough to measure with a tape measure, you know?
Yeah.
So that was fun.
Okay, so motorcycle racing, getting in, having a full machine shop, doing a little bit of everything. So again, back to the V-twin thing. Did Harley call you guys, or did y'all look at the rules and say, hey, you know what, this V-twin has got some advantages?
That's great. I had a customer, a Pro Stock motorcycle customer from Wisconsin, and he had a Suzuki that we built for him, and it was right there by the plant in Milwaukee. And he says, we need to do a Harley. He said, what can we do to make a Harley competitive? I said, hey, I'm sorry, I mean, they just don't turn enough RPM and they don't breathe. I said, you would talk about a total revamp of an engine, even on the grandest rule scale, to make them competitive. And he said, well, let's put a package together and let's go to Harley. And so we worked on it, and a little bit through, by accident, it leaked through that I could maybe do it with S&S Cycle in Wisconsin. Okay. So we got on Kurt's airplane, flew to Wisconsin, went to meet with the guys at S&S. We were Team Winston. We had the red and white 18-wheeler. We had Angel as a driver. We were winning races. And we invited S&S out to the NHRA drags to see what was all possible. And they had 3 or 4 guys that were running the older V-twins, but they weren't going in the 7s yet. Okay. We were going low 7s. And we talked about what was possible, and they loved the idea of getting their fans and their customers into that market. Right. So a bunch of us worked together, and we came up with a plan to build a V-twin that could run 10,000 RPM, really big bore, short stroke, and that was so backwards from what anybody was working on, because on a Harley, a V-twin, the only way you could make them go fast was to add stroke. Right. Because they had bore limitations with the way the cases were designed. So they reinvented that whole deal and got really big bore. So we ended up, our first S&S Pro Stock engine was a 5 1/8 bore. Wow. With a 2.8 intake valve, and we had a pair of 3.5-inch throttle blades, one per cylinder, and the heads would flow over 600 CFM the first day. Man. And we didn't know that you have to call these people first. Now, in 2021, if you're going to build some really cool engine, you call these guys first. Right. You make sure you can wrap the piston with something that'll seal up. Then you build the engine around that. Yeah, you're right. Over 5-inch bore. There were not a lot of piston ring options back in the day. So the guys at S&S did a great job. They found, excuse me, they found some air compressor rings, sent them over to Total Seal, and they ground them, cut them down to where they got them down to about a 1/16th. And put them in there, and of course no gas ports either, just compressor rings, and they were not of a good high enough alloy to handle the heat or anything, but at least it gave us a kick start to see what was going to be possible. So then I call up and talk to the guys at Total Seal, and I said, and this is not a Total Seal commercial. He looks like a Total Seal commercial, but this is not one. This is true story. So what I did was I called up Total Seal and I said, we need to order enough parts to get some rings to make these work. What do we have to do? Well, you got to buy this, and you got to buy that, and it's a whole coil, it's a whole this, and it's a whole that, and I learned a lot about rings pretty fast. So we jumped in the deep end, and we paid for the tooling to get some really big rings. And when I retired from that in 2016, we were running 5.140 bore, and there were rings available for that in every size. Right. So that's pretty thin stuff too, way thinner than the 16th. Yes, way thinner. Matter of fact, it looks like an oil rail to me. So the biggest thing to me when I think about making that change from a overhead valve for valve deal to a push rod this
valve. talk about what that transition was, 'cause that had to be like learning a different language.
Well, S&S bought a Spintron.
Okay.
They spent a lot of money on putting a package on there that they could actually test stuff and throw push rods all out of it and learn a lot really fast. And it helped us learn about the oil, the lubrication system, the oil pumps. We settled on a daily pump that was, this is really cool info, that we would turn about 1.2 times the crankshaft. We were turning the crank 10,000 RPM, so the little oil pump was really getting it.
Wow.
It was a belt drive
turned
pump.
the oil pump faster than the crankshaft speed.
Yeah.
I'm out. My mind's blown.
Okay. What we were looking for was, since it was a roller bearing crankshaft, it had ball bearings on the mains, it had roller bearings on the rods, and we were trying to turn it 10,000 RPM, and there wasn't anybody to call that had done this, so we had to sort of figure it out. The guys at S&S worked on this every day for a long time to make it work. But what our goal was to have 20 psi of oil through a -6 hose and 20 or 25 inches of vacuum with a -12 return.
Okay.
So we kept speeding the pump up till we were able to get there. And we kept changing the stage sizes till we got both ends of the spectrum. So we had giant return and we had tiny supply, and then last thing we burned up, which ended up being the perfect indicator for lubrication, was the push rod tips.
Yep.
When we started, everything was beautiful but the push rod tips. That's when we were on the last row.
Right. And too bad we didn't have profilometers back then. Not surface finish. We probably could have tuned them up right there.
Didn't have a clue. We burned up everything as we got faster. And let me tell you a real quick story. I know we don't have a bunch of time for this one, but when you have a block that's perfect size and it sets record, it qualifies on the pole, the last thing you want to do is buy another block, start over.
Yes.
So what we would do is we would hone it, and then you couldn't start over and put a RVK in it. You would just hone it for rings. Okay, so then the RVK is getting smaller and smaller, the valleys are getting shallower and shallower, and the RA is getting smoother and smoother, and we are making a mess. But we hone it out, put rings in it, race it. Hone it out, put rings in it, race it. Over a year's time, about 5 or 6 times, now you have an engine that will not even hardly qualify. Never mind last long enough to run the race. But you didn't change anything.
We didn't change nothing. We all did is hone and put the same rings in it again.
Yeah, so we learned that the hard way. So then we started getting lots of cylinders to bore and hone. Then we started to realize that the piston manufacturer could make 2 overs, 3 overs, 4 overs, and then that wasn't good enough. We kept burning them up, so we started having to go 5 over to be able to put some RVK in it and start over every time.
Got it.
So that was and how do you do that with the rules? Well, the crankshafts weren't easy. We had to have custom cranks made with the roller bearings, big 8-inch flywheels, pressed in pins, and we had to keep pulling stroke out as we kept adding bore, because when we started going fast, they would pull us down every race and measure us. And if you showed up with more than 160 cubic inches, the Wally goes home and the banner's not worth anything.
Right, exactly. Yeah, your name's Mud.
The Mud.
Yeah. So you were telling me earlier before we started that learning process going from air-cooled to water-cooled.
Right. So the new super bikes, the 4-cylinders and the twins now, are almost all of them are water-cooled now. And our last the Harleys, this is a brand new Harley here, the Milwaukee 8114. It's air-cooled, and it really struggles with heat. So they're coming out, they're trying to keep the Harley sound that the clients love, and the Harley fans love this sound. So every time they try to build a water cool, and they would change so much of the architecture of the engine that it would ruin the Harley sound. So now they're going to try and have a water cooled one that sounds like a Harley. That's the next goal for them. But what happened to us, the hot rod industry, was we would get the clearances right. We had the materials right. We were doing a good job after a long time of burning up and blowing up parts. We figured out how to make it work. Then the first water-cooled engine comes in, and we put all the same clearances on it. We didn't know that the piston got to size quick. The water kept the cylinder really little. So as soon as you'd floor it and go out wide open, you'd stick it. And on a motorcycle, if you stick it, you usually put flat spots on the tires, or you fall off, or something in between. And it was no fun. And it was hard to buy liability insurance.
Listen, I know how fast it feels to go on a go-kart pretty quick. I can't imagine going 200 miles an hour holding on to handlebars.
Oh yeah, it's got to be stupid. Yeah, it out-qualified me a few years back.
So that's the biggest thing, right? You saw that transition. Now your cylinders aren't growing at the same rate the pistons were.
Right. So
now you had to rethink all of your clearances, in gaps, piston to wall clearances, pretty much everything, right?
Yep, and we try to simulate without any money or any budget to simulate the operating temperatures and operating pressures. And,
right.
And the highly funded teams they do that in shop and they learn on the racetrack. But we were a cut and try deal. We would run it, take it apart and look at it, run it, take it apart and look at it, and we learned the hard way. My last year in Pro Stock with the 5-inch bore, we had the company make us 15 different iterations of the pistons in one season.
15.
Changing rings, changing ring belt diameter, changing depths, ringland depths, changing skirt shape and finish and barrel, trying to get that little football shape on the skirt. And
right.
Also, measuring for ring seal. We had we were monitoring, everything was based around the G meter and the crankcase pressure.
Got it.
Is what we were using as our judge. And then, of course, the clock.
Sure.
Always told us what we were doing right. But the cool stuff about learning all of that at the time was seeing how important ring seal was from the very first day to today. Everything, my whole, probably 50% of everything I do in engine technology today is all about ring seal.
Well, yeah, we've heard that from several engine builders who've been on the Hidden Horsepower podcast, that that's the pump. It's an air pump. Ring seal is what pulls it in and pushes it out. And if you don't have that, you're wasting your time. Everything else is after the fact. Like you get that right, then you can start working everything else and you can really make some gains, but that's like having a bad foundation for your house.
It is. It's like, it is built on the sand or built on the rock. But,
exactly.
But, the funny thing, I remember a long time ago when Warren Johnson was telling, about the cylinder heads, when he first started with the DRC E3 and 4 deal, talking about, it didn't matter how good the heads were, as long as you didn't have any ring seal, because the flow bench just cannot produce power if you can't seal anything.
Right.
Can't produce power. So we took that to heart, learned about it, and watched it burn up. We burned up rings, we burned up cylinders, we burned up pistons. We changed shapes, we changed sizes, and it's an evolution to get here right now.
Well, it's an iteration. I think that's the thing that you're talking about that we see over and over again, is that yes, you can do some math, and math is really important to figure out things. But at the end of the day, you still got to put parts in an engine.
That's right.
And go out there and run it, and then listen to what those parts tell you.
Yeah, I hate it when somebody says, well, the maximum is X based on math. And I'm like, wow, they didn't ride along with me all these years. Because all we've been doing is changing the formula, changing the numbers in the math, but we still use the math. Right.
And the thing is, like I said earlier, material changes. All these things we mentioned before, it's a soup. It's a combination.
Yep.
And as you start changing that soup, now the calculus changes, if you will. And it's like it's a different formula because it's a different soup.
Yep.
And you got to keep on chipping away at it. So what other kind of things did you pick up in your career as going through these different iterations of from water-cooled to air-cooled, from V-twins to straightforwards and all that?
Great question. The one thing that was all-encompassing always was the biggest bore always wins.
Okay.
As we would go, somebody would bring us a new combination of a genre, like a go-kart engine or a motocross engine or something to road racing on the bottom of the earth. Every time we finished or got near the end of the project, the bore was always bigger. I never got one person that ever brought me one that had as much bore as it could get. And you got to move what you got to move to get the bore, because the rules are this amount of cubic inches and this amount of RPM. All your professional categories and all your professional sanctionings are going to have an RPM limit. Once it gets out of hand, you got to put an RPM limit. So we've watched that happen in several different sanctions.
Oh yes.
So if you're going to have an RPM limit, the right way to go fast is to put bigger bore in it, bigger valves, shorten up the stroke, and put more demand on the cylinder head by creating a depression with a big piston going down really fast and letting God's atmosphere push it in the engine. And then you want the cam timing every time to close it at the right time so you have more than 100% in the cylinder.
IVE is what you're aiming for.
Yeah. And that's an acronym for
volumetric efficiency. So if you haven't ever paid attention to, George has a YouTube channel, and you're on Facebook too, right?
Facebook Live.
Facebook Live.
Tonight.
Checked it. That is tonight. Yeah, it's Tuesday. Yeah. So if you haven't done it already, subscribe to George's channel on YouTube. Go to the Facebook deal. Watch the Tech Tip Tuesdays. I'm a big fan.
Thanks.
I watch them all the time when I can. So the great thing is that's the great thing about YouTube, and like what we're doing here, is it's recorded. So if you can't catch it live, it's always there. You can go back, look through the archives, and find it, because it really is a gift, because you share your experience and everything. Because there's a lot of experience. What was that number you said earlier? How much each of those Wallies cost?
Oh my God. Over a 20-year period, we counted how much money we spent to win the races and win the championships, and divided it by the 80-something Wallies we had, and it ended up being $97,000 a piece.
Woohoo!
So if somebody ever wanted to take a Wally and try and figure out how to turn it into currency, I want to tell you, we figured out how to turn currency into Wallies.
I think most racers are good at that, by the way.
Yeah, they are. Hey, I wanted to add, too, before we get a chance to clock out, I want to say that I'm very thankful and fortunate to have an opportunity to take these things that I've learned in these different avenues and put them into what we're working on today, and how relative it is whenever you come up with any subject. It's basics that have been learned down through history on a four-stroke, engine, and all those same things matter to all of those engines. Yes, they have different little adjustments and different ideas, but the basics matter.
Well, like you said earlier, you were fortunate enough to have Winston sponsor you.
Yep.
And so your day job was coming in, clocking in to try to find another horsepower today.
Yeah, the fans didn't know that Jackie and I got fussed at if we didn't go fast. And it wasn't their fault. It was the fact that they expected to see the Winston bike go down the track every opportunity. So you don't sit out a qualifying round just because you're winning by a lot. You don't sit in a trailer while everybody else is running, and you don't lose first round. You have to make as many laps as you can, and they don't have any excuses. They want to know why.
Right. Well, the same thing with from the Gibbs side.
Yes, sir.
Home Depot, FedEx, M&M's, Interstate Batteries. Those guys didn't care how much money we spent on oil or whatever else. Winning races, winning championships was all about. And we're both in a fortunate position now. We can share those lessons that we learned on somebody else's dollar and share it with all those people, so that, hey, you don't have to guess or wonder what those fundamental basic things are.
That's right. That's right.
We can tell you what those things are from our experience, and like you always say in the Tech Tip Tuesdays, that, hey, this is our experience. I'm not saying there's no other way it can be done.
I'm so wrong if you think that.
We can tell you what we did.
Yes, this is what I did. This is what I think I learned. This is what I think I know because of it. And I want you to say it's not an argument. It's just what I think.
Right. And then you can take that information and do what you see fit with it. But at least you're not having to guess, right? It's one thing to go on the internet and find somebody writing a story or something, and they may have never even had a car.
Yeah.
I remember one time we were doing an article on some oil stuff one time, and the reporter was from the Wall Street Journal.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm talking to this guy about this thing, and he's writing the article, right? It clues into me. He's in New York City. I bet he doesn't even own a car.
No, or a parking spot.
And I asked the guy, I said, hey, do you happen to own a car? It's like, nope. I'm like, okay. Because I can kind of tell you he was struggling with it a little bit, right?
Yeah.
I said, here, tell you what, I'm going to send you a couple of links to a couple of YouTube videos. I want you to go watch these YouTube videos, and then I'll call you back tomorrow, and we'll pick up the conversation again.
There you go.
And he picked it up, and he did a good job and everything, but you understand that not everyone who writes something actually knows, has that experience behind it.
They know how to write.
They know how to write,
and
they can speak sometimes. That doesn't mean they actually have the experience. And that's that one great thing about having somebody like yourself be part of the Engine Performance Expo, is that we're able to let somebody like yourself share your experience, and then people can do what they see fit from there.
That's right. Take it to use it your best way you see fit. It's your decision. Hey, but I don't mind sharing with you what I think I learned, and I do that every week, Tuesday, 6 o'clock Eastern.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you, George. Really appreciate your time being on the Engine Performance Expo, and hopefully we'll see you live here in a little bit. Let Joe interview you.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Thanks.
What a day, what a day, what a day. Yeah, my brain is swollen. I've learned so much today. They told us, don't start cars. We are not going to listen.